Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. Today I have with me Andy Cook, G4PIQ. Andy is the Director of Sites and Stations for the WRTC 2026, the World Radiosport Team Championship. He comes to the task with a great background. He was licensed when he was 16. He got into weak signal and very competitive VHF contesting when he was young, made the transition to HF contesting, and at that point became a very big part of the M6T contest station in England, a formidable contest station. And from what I understand, he was one of the leading architects of that station, so he has some great experience. Andy, I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thanks for taking the time to have a chat, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Did I get that background right?
You had it bang on. I could almost have written it myself. No, that's fantastic. I'm a very keen contester, and it doesn't really matter whether I'm running something at the big M6T contest station or I'm sitting at home with a wire, wheedling stuff out that's low power and weak signal. Anything competitive is just great. I love it.
Well, talk to me about that, because I honestly have not talked to any contester that's done the weak signal VHF contesting. What got you interested in that, and have you still continued in that?
Yes. So when I first took my my license at 16, I went on HF for a bit with an old transmitter and a homebrew receiver, and then somebody lent me a 2-meter transverter. And that delivered 700 milliwatts of real flea power of SSB on 2 meters, and I made a Yagi up out of some bits of aluminium I had lying around, and I stuck it on a bit of wood that came out. Literally, I cut off a tree and used that as a mast that was stuck in a bucket of sand. And in about 3 months, I worked 50 grid squares and up to 900 kilometers, and it just grabbed me. You never know what's going to happen. And over the years, I built that station up from being small to being a pretty big station. I had fully ME capability, 4 Yagis for contests. I had 3 completely separate antenna systems. It was competitive at a European level. And the thing about the VHF side of things is you have to squeeze every last dB. Every dB really counts, and all those little bits of engineering make a real difference. And in many ways, it's like 160 meters. 160 is pretty similar. I spent the last week calling 4W8X, who's been up and down and in and out of the noise, and just those few dB make that difference of being able to make QSOs or not. So I think it's that real attention to detail of the weak signal stuff that a dB on EME makes an enormous difference, and that's what grabbed it for me. You asked me whether I carried on doing it. I have. I'm not as active as I used to be right now because family came along and we moved house, and I've got a daughter and a life, so I don't have a big 2-meter station here right now. But there is a hole in the garden. There is a tower on the ground. There are amplifiers in the shed, and I hope to be back on with it real soon because it's one of my passions.
So I've got to believe that experience must have been very foundational when you get into HF contesting. Because if you're working with weak signal VHF, and then you move over to HF with that kind of background, that kind of experience, that kind of talent and skill, it must have contributed very positively to your HF contesting experience.
It certainly helps. I think it certainly helps wheedle out the weak ones from the noise. I guess what you learn at HF is you learn that you have to do rate as well, and that's an important thing, because even in Europe, where we've got a pretty high VHF population, over 120 an hour would be pretty unheard of, and typically you're down at the 50, 60 an hour rate, whereas HF, rate is more important. But I think it does help, wheedle those really weak signals out of the noise that that come and go and are fleeting, on HF, just in the same way as they are at VHF.
So Andy, I am excited about talking about the MRTC 2026. However, before we get there, I want to hear more about M6T. How did you get involved with that contest station? How did it evolve over time?
So M6T was a contest station that was built up by a guy by the name of Bob Carpenter, G4BAH, who's sadly silent key now. He passed away about 6 years ago. But I knew Bob from work, actually. We both work for a large telecoms company, and when I went there as a student, I ran into Bob, and he was one of life's real enthusiasts. And always keen to do contesting, and he wanted to start a little group to do some serious contesting. So he went out and bought a couple of mobile crank up towers, and we did the odd bit of contesting. We used to do some VHF contesting as well, go out portable and do that. And I remember one day standing in a field and Bob saying, he pointed to the edge of the field and he said, "What I'd like to see there is I'd like to see a tower for 10, a tower for 15, a tower for 20, a tower for 40, a tower for 80, a tower for 160, and we'd be there doing multi HF contesting." And I said, "Yeah, right, Bob, that would be good, wouldn't it?" But of course, Bob being Bob, he put the investment in to make that happen. So really, the way that the M6T happened, it started out as a small group of about half a dozen of us. Kit bought largely by Bob, a couple of towers doing multi-single. And then in 1991, I think, was our first multi entry to CQ Worldwide, and pretty much that set up one tower for each band. But the thing we had to do, we had no fixed home, so every time we did the contest, we had to set the thing up from scratch. And over the next few years, really through until about 1996, the station grew and grew, and we got to having a 150-foot vertical for 80, for 160, a full-size 4-square for 80, full-size 3-element Yagi for 40, stacks on 20, 15, and 10, separate antennas, and we take a week off work to set this stuff up, and then rip it down after the end of the contest. And then we had to move locations. So that that landowner wanted the land to plant trees, so we moved on to another site, spent a couple of years there, and then that landowner, I think, really wanted us gone as well. So Bob bought he looked around and looked hard for the best possible VHF site that he could, or HF and VHF site that he could find, and found one in the region of East Anglia, and that's now where M6T still sits. And my part was really doing an awful lot of the technical work for the station. So while Bob was the driving force really around making the things happen, my job was bits of technical innovation. How do we drive multiple antennas? How do we get more interesting stuff on receive? How do we really make things a little different? And that was my side of the things, plus of course some operating as well. And so the station's now, it's still in this permanent home even after Bob's left us. And we're just getting ready for next weekend, and a few new toys on the drawing board as well. I've got some building to do when we're done this call tonight.
Well, it's pretty amazing that you have a competitive contest station that was portable, basically. You're setting it up a week in advance. That's pretty amazing. I mean, we all do that for field day, right? But it's not the same as setting up a competitive contest station. That's
I should say it's not it's not quite like that anymore. We're all too old for that now. We still have to, there's always work to be done. The towers all have to be wound up, some cables rolled out and stations put together and so on, but it's not the same as 1 week of full hard physical work anymore.
So let's move on to the WRTC. I've been intrigued by the WRTC since initially talking to people like Randy Thompson, K5ZD, and Tim Duffy, K3LR. And then, as you know, I recently talked to Mark Haynes, M0DXR, talking about the bid that England put in for the WRTC 2026. Sounds super exciting. When did you get involved with the process? Were you part of the initial team working with Mark to get the WRTC to England?
Yes, I was. I mean, my involvement with WRTC goes back to 2002, when I took part in Finland, and I also went to Russia, took part in Russia as well, and they were fantastic experiences. And so when Mark said he was excited, or he was interested and excited about the prospect of bringing WRTC 2026 to the UK, I couldn't yeah, I couldn't not take part in that. I couldn't not take up his offer. So yeah, absolutely, I was part of that initial crew building the bid, and yeah, it's a big challenge, but you've got to have a go, haven't you?
So I'm curious how that process works. How do you put together a bid to host the WRTC?
I mean, the first thing we did was to try and convince ourselves that it was something that we could manage. And I think one of the things we were most concerned about is, relative to most of the other countries that have taken this on over the years, the UK's got a relatively small amateur contesting population. So we wanted to convince ourselves that we could get enough volunteers to make the thing fly. So we did a sort of straw poll around UK contesters and convinced us we could get over the hurdle of enough volunteers to make the thing happen. And then it was really about saying, what does the budget look like for this? Where will we locate the contest? What new things are we going to try and bring to this event? How are we going to structure the qualifying for the competition? How will we structure the volunteers? All the things that you sort of expect to put together in forming a business plan for any activity. And we put that together and submit that to the WRTC sanctioning committee for their review. They have a good peruse over that and ask a bunch of questions and clarifications, and we to and fro over that. And then eventually we were delighted enough to receive the award of the sanctioning.
Well, congratulations. And before we go any further, for the sake of those people that are watching the show and they don't know what the WRTC is, why don't you give us a quick description of what the WRTC is and what it means to the contesting community?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to describe WRTC is the Olympics of amateur radio. It's essentially an event where around 50 teams of 2 people come together in a single location to take part in an international competition to make as many contacts as they can over a 24-hour period in the IARU HF Radiosport contest using equivalent stations. And it's a real test of who is the best operator, who are the best teams out there who can make the most effective use of that level playing field that they're provided with. Really fiercely competitive. There's a long qualifying process to get to represent your country as well. Essentially, the teams will take part in 12 or at least 12 qualifying events over the next 2 years, and their competitive positions will rack up scores in there, which will and those who come out best in their qualifying areas will be eligible to compete for the award. So that's not only is the event itself highly competitive, the qualifying process itself is highly competitive, because by the very nature we don't have as many spaces as we would like to have for all the people who'd like to take part.
Well, it seems to me when it comes to the WRTC, there's 2 big topics: the qualifying, which we won't get into today, but it's a pretty intense process, and there's a lot of conversation about equity and how to get more people around the world involved. But then the second huge topic is sites and stations and the kind of the fairness of how those sites and locations are chosen, and are people working with a level playing field when they go to operate. So that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, Andy, because you've got that all on your shoulders, right? You need to find 50 sites that 50 teams are going to feel very comfortable operating in, but also feeling comfortable that they are on equal footing with the other 49. So tell me your secret. How did you do that? How will you do that?
How will I do that? Well, there we will see. I mean, I think the whole level playing field is really interesting. The first few WRTCs didn't have that real concept of a level playing field. So I think the real game changer was Russia in 2010, where there were large open field areas around Moscow, which allowed them to locate clumps of stations separated by at least 500 meters over really flat terrain. And so those stations really were genuinely quite, really genuinely equal. And I think that was the game changer. And most of the WRTCs since then have tried and generally succeeded in emulating that. I think people always worry particularly about their sites. I do equally remember, in Finland, which didn't have this same level of level playing field. Some sites were on islands, some were up hills, some were a bit further down, some were better than others. And I do remember hearing the story of the eventual winners there going to the site and thinking this looks a bit rubbish, but they still came out and won. So I think some of this is in the mind, especially when a lot of the IARU competition is focused on Europe, and the arrival angles are relatively high for that. But what we've decided to do for the UK to try and maximise our chance of doing this is, firstly, we're locating the competition in an area of the UK called East Anglia. And if you look at a map of the UK, basically it's the bulge that sits out in the sort of southeast of the country. And it's a pretty flat area. I live in East Anglia, and I'm on a really high point, and I'm at about 200 feet above sea level, 70 meters. So, and that's about as high as it gets in this part of the world. So we're starting from a pretty level playing field of sites. It's also a largely agricultural area, so there are a lot of there are a lot of fields. What I would say is, here in the UK, the IARU competition takes place before our harvest time for corn. So most of the fields will still be, still have corn standing on them, but there's a lot of grassland and so on as well. So we'll be looking to approach local farmers, local landowners for access to those sites. And we'll be looking to, we're planning for 50 teams, so we're planning to have about 55 sites available, because things can go wrong, and one of the things that can go wrong on sites is noise. And even though this is a rural area, it doesn't make you absolutely clean from the scourge of electrical noise, particularly in the modern world. So my intent is that we will try and do a long-term survey of noise on each site. We'll drop a monitoring receiver with an SDR recorder in there to check the noise levels on the site over an extended period of time. And also we'll be doing terrain analysis on the sites using tools like HFTA to make sure that even in this relatively flat terrain of East Anglia, the takeoffs are still acceptably equitable in the important directions. And nothing's ever absolutely identical, but we'll set some boundaries that say this is where our thresholds are going to sit. So that's essentially what we're the way we're going to try and keep things as square as we can.
And Andy, I know in the past there have been tents that have been provided for operating, and then in Italy there were bed and breakfasts. What's the situation here in England?
Yeah, so we're planning to go back to tents. I think the situation in Italy is unique. I think those agriturismos are relatively unique to Italy, so it's not something that's present here. So no, so we're planning to go back to tents and generators, and the antenna systems will be the same as you saw in Italy. But yeah, we're going back to that traditional thing. And the weather in the UK at that time of year is usually not too bad. It's usually 70, 80 degrees, so it should be pleasant in the tents as opposed to roasting, I hope.
So Andy, can you be more specific on the towers and antennas that will be used?
Yes, I mean we've actually agreed to purchase what was used in Italy for the benefit of reuse. So they will be the same small 223 tri-band element tri-banders and masts, dipole for 80, dipole for 40 on a sort of 10-meter tall mast.
And I understand in Italy, at least, and I'm sure this is the same with all the WRTCs, there's a lottery where locations are assigned to teams. Will that happen in England?
Yes, we haven't planned how we're going to do that yet, but I'm sure we will do that. That's it's the sites are as equitable as they can be, but we'll make sure that that allocation is a random process.
And what sort of radius are we talking from where people are located to, say, the furthest site?
Well, I was thinking about this as I came here this evening. I don't think we know exactly what that's going to look like, but I would hope we'll get that within 100 kilometers. Um, it kind of works. Well, we'll see what we find within that location, and if we haven't got enough sites, we'll go on a bit further. But the community, the road communication is pretty good in East Anglia. It's not too difficult to get from A to B. So I think we'll do all right, but it'll rather depend on who we find that's got sites. And what we'd like to do, we'd like to cluster sites together as well as much as possible to make it easier from the logistics point of view. I mean, clearly, 55 individual sites all completely separate and individual will be a tough call. If we can get some groups of 2 or 3 together in one place, that will be good. But what we will do is obviously maintain sufficient separation between the sites to ensure that people can operate without undue interference. What was done in Russia was 500 meters, and that worked really quite effectively, even with the radios at that time that were in use, where lots of people were using radios that don't have the phase noise performance of today's radios. So that's the sort of direction that we're headed there.
Andy, clearly you're doing a lot of work to make sure there's not an issue, but I'm sure you're also anticipating that there may be some issues that come up at the last minute. A team goes to a site, they experience some noise or maybe an antenna failure. I think I heard in Italy one of the beams fell off its mast, or at least repositioned on the mast. What sort of plans will you make to support those types of problems? Is there going to be a mobile team that will be sent to a site to try to resolve issues like that?
Yeah. I mean, well, you can absolutely guarantee that if it can go wrong, it will. It's a contest, so life is like that. So we will be prepared. So the first, the major preparation for that is additional sites. So this is why we plan 55 sites for 50 stations. So we will have some spare locations to move people to. How we'll make that work? There will certainly be a plan for a team on hand to move people if we find that there's an issue. And yes, there could be a number of things. Electrical noise, appears at random. I mean, I spent some time a few months ago, chasing down a random noise that appeared near our contest station, and a mile and a half down the road, we found someone with a big dirty electric car charger. And these things can make a difference over quite a long distance. So we got to be prepared for that sort of thing. And our primary means of defence there is going to be secondary sites if it's not a simple thing that we can fix on the location itself.
Andy, one of the things I love about the ham radio community is that everybody has an opinion. And I think when it comes to contesting, that's just exponentially even greater. So I'm sure you've been fielding a lot of comments, feedback, opinions about how the WRTC 2026 ought to run. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how you and Mark and the others are dealing with all the forums that are offering? I'm sure you're watching the same things I am. All the forums that are offering opinions about qualifying, about stations, about equity, about how this is going to run. How are you addressing that?
It's always frustrating, isn't it? I mean, because whenever I do something, I always want to make everybody happy. I should say one of my other roles in amateur radio is I chair the VHF contest committee in the UK, so I'm responsible for the team that set all the rules. And I've had 2 batches doing that, so I've probably done it on and off now for about 15 years. And I've been involved for a lot longer than that. And the one thing I have learned is that you can't please all the people all the time. So we read everything. We have genuinely tried to do everything in as data-driven way as we can possibly be, to really look at the numbers And there's lots of opinions out there that people have about, is there more activity from this country? Is there more activity from that country? Actually go look at the data. The data doesn't, it doesn't lie. It's all there. So we've used that, and we've done our best to try and ameliorate things and keep everybody happy. You can't keep everyone happy, but ultimately you have to draw a line in the sand at some point and move on. It's difficult. I hate upsetting people, but sometimes you just have to draw that line and move on. We read everything. We're doing our best to keep on top of things. We're trying to listen hard to what the community says and take take those actions into our take actions based on people's views and what we think. So that's really how we're handling it. But I think qualifying has clearly been the most contentious thing that we've had to deal with so far, and it's certainly, you can't please all the people all the time, but we've got some constraints. One of our constraints is because we're that bit smaller country with in terms of active population, we're down to 50 teams as opposed to a little over 60 that they've had in the last few events. So that's puts a few extra constraints on us. But that's where we feel we need to hold it to give us the best chance of pulling the thing off.
Good answer. Andy, I appreciate your time today, and I certainly appreciate the contribution you're making to Ham Radio and to the WRTC 2026. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for your time and taking time to do the interview, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
I've been talking to Andy Cook, G4PIQ, WRTC 2026. We really are fortunate to have people like Andy and Mark putting this competitive event together. Take a look at their website and learn more about it. Thank you again, Andy.
Cheers. Good night.